This podcast is about introducing our fans to the animals, plants, and other products that we work with at Josh's Frogs. It's an opportunity to paint a picture of our hobby that is refreshing. We want you guys to be successful with the animals that you're keeping, and we want our hobby to grow ethically and sustainably into the future. Hello and welcome to the Josh's Frogs podcast. I'm here with Jake. We're going to talk about Pumilio, but before we do that, just want to let you know that the Josh's Frogs podcast is brought to you by Josh's Frogs. We're your one-stop shop for all your reptile, amphibian, and pet bug needs. So not only captive bred animals, but we also carry all the supplies you need to take care of those. So anything from substrates to caging to lighting to live plants, we've got it all. And then we also carry all the feeder insects you need to take care of those animals. We're really big on education here as well, too. So tons of blogs, articles, videos, that kind of stuff. We want you to be educated and informed about how to take care of these animals. We want you to be successful. So check us out at joshsfrogs.com. And without further ado, welcome, Jake, to the podcast again. I believe this is your third episode.
Good to be back.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about how long you've been at Josh's Frogs and what species do you work with here?
I just had a quick question. Is the Josh's Frogs podcast ever not sponsored by Josh's Frogs? Are we leaving that open for like future sponsors?
We're leaving that open,
Okay,
so
cool.
anyone who would want to do it could do it.
Hit us up. But no, I've been here now for 5 years, 3 months, and 21 days. If
Wow.
you know, nobody, not that anybody's keeping track or anything, but and I spent that entire time in the dart frog department.
Yeah.
I'm starting off with tadpoles, working my way up to what I do now. I've worked with the majority of the adult darts here, but now I focus mainly on thumbnails and obligates, which is what we're going to be talking about today, the Pumilio.
Sweet. So you're working with the smaller guys. Give us a little bit of like, hey, how are the smaller guys different than the bigger guys? Like what are the differences? You've worked with the bigger guys, the Tinctorius, Auratus, Phyllobates. You've worked with those in the past. How is working with the smaller frogs? How is that a little bit different?
The smaller frogs definitely present a different challenge in that, I mean, they are small. So like sometimes when they come out of the water, they're a little too small to be eating certain foods.
Yep.
So like a lot of springtails are necessary
Yep.
to raise them up. Also, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of the thumbnails have fewer eggs per clutch. So like I might have 4 or 5 awesome breeding imitator tanks, but that's like 10 eggs a week, you know? So it's like where, you know, your average large dart is like 6 to 10 eggs per clutch.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say it definitely presents its own challenges, but it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it.
Yeah. Yep. They have the reputation for being harder to keep than some of the bigger frogs. Would you say that you agree with that? That like, hey, they are a little bit harder. Like, would you agree that they just have that reputation?
I think they're harder to raise for sure.
Yeah.
Getting them to the size where I feel comfortable sending them out is definitely a challenge. It takes me a bit longer than average, which for us is like 8 weeks is when we feel good about sending out our large darts. It takes me a little bit longer usually, not always, but I would say the adults are not too bad, though. There's some things you got to keep in mind with smaller frogs. Like a lot of them are more arboreal. Mm-hmm. So like if you leave your lid open, like they're going to be right at the top. Like a lot of them will lay eggs right in the lip of the tank. And, you know, they can climb out, where if you have your Phyllobates lid open, they're just going to look up at it and just be like, okay, where's my food?
Yeah. Cool. All right, so tell us a little bit about Pumilio, like what makes them unique when it comes to dart frogs. Like give us a rundown. What are Pumilio?
Yeah, so we're jumping around a little bit. Pumilio are not thumbnails. Thumbnail dart frogs are in the genus Ranitomea. Sometimes they get grouped like colloquially, but they are part of a genus known as Oophaga, which are called obligate dart frogs. So the first episode we talked about imitator darts and how they were facultative egg eaters, meaning that the parents will stick around and raise the tadpole by feeding it infertile eggs. But facultative is in like they don't have to do that. The tadpole can survive. Like we raise our tadpoles, they do fine. But with obligates or Oophaga, they're obligated to eat the eggs. So this is like high levels of parental care in the frog. The parents have to stick around and raise the tadpoles. There's really no other way to do it. And that's just like super interesting because, I mean, when you think of parental care in animals, you're thinking of like mammals and birds. Like you wouldn't expect this little 1-inch frog to be like, you know, bonded for life and to be, you know, raising all their babies together. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about the different type of Pumilio that we work with and the different types of Pumilio that people might come across in the hobby. So I think sometimes like people think of, like, I'll just use one example, like the blue jean dart frog.
Yeah.
Like people wouldn't even know that necessarily was a Pumilio. So talk a little bit about what's available and what would people see.
Yeah, Pumilio are really cool. They're one of the most variable of the dart frogs in terms of color. You can find them in like Nicaragua and Panama and Costa Rica as well, and they just come in a huge variety of colors. Definitely one of the most variable. I would say obligates in general for us are one of the newer things we're working on. We don't have a ton of them yet. We're working with Bastimentos, which is a pretty popular one. We've got Nikki, which is a little bit smaller one. It's red. It's cool. We've got like Rio Branco. We've got I'm gonna butcher this because there's Puerto Viejo and like Puerta Vieja.
Yeah.
The Puerto Viejo, I think, is what we have.
Yep.
And I might have gotten fraud checked, though. But, yeah, and we're working with a few.
Cool.
El Dorado as well. So we've got some going.
Yeah. Now, Pumilio you tend not to see as frequently as other dart frogs, and it's mainly due to the parental care aspect of it that leads to less young. So you talked a little bit about thumbnail production, like what's considered average or really good for how many babies would come out of a pair of Pumilio in captivity.
Yeah, so a lot of Pumilio can lay more eggs per clutch than something like an imitator, which is like 2. You know, they can lay 5, 6, 7 eggs a clutch. But because the mom actually has to, so let me back up. When they lay their eggs, the female will actually carry the tadpoles to a source of water. In a lot of dart frogs, it's the male, but the female's got to know where it's at so she can feed it. So she'll carry that on her back to like a bromeliad is what you'll see a lot in the wild, or, you know, tree stumper, something like that, a source of water. And then she'll actually stick around and feed the tadpole infertile eggs. And the way she does that is she will basically slide into the water, and then the tadpole will swim up and basically like nibble on her, and that's her cue to lay some eggs for them.
Wow.
There's also some evidence that the tadpoles are actually getting some toxicity from those like mucus secretions from the mom, which is kind of cool.
Oh, wow.
Just kind of a side note.
Yeah.
But yeah, so because they're obligated to be raised, where normally like, you know, your frog will lay 1 clutch of eggs. If that clutch is gone, you remove them, or they're tadpoles, they're going to go and lay another clutch of eggs. But if the female is returning to that pool of water and there's a tadpole there, she's not going to lay any more eggs. So you're really limited to like a few froglets per few months, you know.
Wow.
So it's just a lot slower, which is why you don't see quite as many available. But
yeah. Now talk a little bit about size coming out of the water. Like, how does that compare to some of the larger dart frogs, and how does that compare to some of the other thumbnails? Like, how big are they coming out of the water?
It kind of depends, because like you can have parents that are maybe like not as good that should probably like read some parenting books, take some classes or something, because yeah, like it just depends how much they're feeding their tadpoles and how many they're trying to raise at once. I've noticed I had a tank of, I believe, brie, and they were laying tons of eggs. They're all fertile eggs. They're all good eggs, but they were trying to raise like 20 tadpoles at once, and each tadpole's just not getting enough food then.
Yeah.
So
wow.
I would say it depends, but they come out of the water maybe a little bit larger than the thumbnail, or about the same size.
Cool. Now, when they're coming out of the water, so we're definitely not pulling eggs, and we're definitely not pulling tadpoles because of the way, like, when would we pull them out of the parent's tank, and how do we navigate that, getting the babies out of the tank?
So here, like a side note, when I was dealing with that tank, I was removing some of the tads because there was just too many for them to raise, and I was trying to raise them on my own. And one little experiment I did was using, I didn't have enough like infertile obligate eggs to use, which is what they would be eating. So I was trying infertile Epipetabates eggs, and it wasn't really that successful. It was kind of difficult. I noticed the egg has more like egg white on it in an Epipetabates, so I had to like take a razor blade and like scrape it off. And I actually got one to raise up though. So it is like physically possible to raise one up yourself, but it's like really difficult, really time consuming, and like overall I would not recommend it.
Interesting. That's crazy.
But yeah, just like a little side note.
That's crazy. Now,
what was the actual question?
Talk about like how long are we letting the babies live in the tank before we're pulling the babies out? Are we pulling them out pretty quickly? Are we letting them stay in there with the parents for a little bit?
Yeah, so this is, I guess, a matter of debate. Some people will remove the babies immediately and raise them up on their own. I've noticed occasionally, and I've read a lot on forums as well from people who are way more successful with obligates than I am, that the babies can really struggle when you remove them. I don't know exactly why, but they can deal with like seizures and like just a lot of issues in general. So I leave them in like a really long time. Like I feel really comfortable leaving them in for like 4 or 5 months even, like until they're like, I mean, I've left some in before where they were almost the same size as the parents by the time I removed them, but I've just felt like, at least for the frogs that we're working with, it tends to work out pretty well. I get some healthy babies that are not going to have any issues.
Cool. Talk a little bit about setup. Like, how are we setting these guys up, cage size, and maybe how that differs a little bit from some of the other frogs that we deal with.
Yeah, so we have some of them in our normal, like, 20-gallon high enclosures. These we do keep in pairs. But yeah, 20-gallon high is fine. We also have a lot of exoterras, like 18 cubes or 18 24s. And a big thing with the setup is bromeliads, and you can use like film canisters as well. There's a product called a Tadpool. Maybe I'll save that for my shout out. Yeah, I like those a lot as well. It's kind of like a combination of like a bromeliad and like a film canister. They're pretty nice. I like those a lot. But just having all of those sources of water so they can lay their eggs and have somewhere to raise the tads.
I know I get this question a lot when I do shows about when it comes to bromeliads, about which bromeliads do the frogs prefer to use? Do they prefer bromeliads that have a lot of spikes or not have a lot of spikes, or ones that have big cups or small cups? What are you observing? Are you observing like anything where like, hey, they only use this type of bromeliad, they only like this type? Are you observing any of that happening in any
I'm
of
definitely going to get fraud checked. I don't really know that much about plants, honestly. You think I would, because like I'm propagating all these plants in the tank, but I don't really know that much about the Broms. I've noticed they can raise their tads in like a comically small amount of water. Like I prefer ones that can contain a lot of water because I find they're easier to like clean out. Like in the wild, they're breeding in the rainy season, and these Broms are getting flushed out with fresh water like multiple times a day. So I like to take our RO hose and kind of spray it, just kind of flush out some of that like organic matter. But and I like ones that can hold a little bit more water for that reason. But essentially, as long as they can hold an adequate amount of water, which is not very much, they'll do fine. I haven't noticed a huge difference in like spikes or no spikes.
Cool. Sounds good. Now, talk a little bit about temperature, humidity. Like, are we using all glass tops of the Pumilio? Like, how are we managing that when it comes to those guys?
Yeah, right now we have them set up the exact same way. Like low to mid 70s temperature, 80 to 100% humidity. We're using the glass lids as well. One thing that is nice, though, if you have like a mist king or some kind of misting setup, is you can point it towards the Broms, and then that's going to do your flushing out for you, and it's really nice. So that's something I definitely recommend. Cool. But other than that, I have this tank set up relatively the same. One thing that's important, though, obviously, is when the babies climb out, they're relatively small, so having an adequate supply of like springtails and isopods in the leaf litter is going to be really important for them to raise up successfully.
I have a theory that's why people have trouble when they take them out of the tank, is that there's so much stuff in the tank that's available to be eaten, and when you set up a bin for the babies, that there just isn't as much diversity of bugs. So that's my theory. So maybe I'll get fraud checked or canceled for saying that's true. But I feel like leaving them in with the parents is probably the best bet.
I'm sure I'll get a comment like, no, I take mine out all the time and they're all good. I'm like, however you do it works.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I've definitely had more success leaving them in for a pretty long period of time, honestly.
Cool. You shared a lot about breeding. How old do Pumilio tend to be before they start breeding? I know about a year. Okay, because I know some of the thumbnails can breed quite a bit earlier than that, whereas some of the larger frogs a little bit later.
I think it depends. Males are definitely ready earlier than females. I have a breeding tank of El Dorado that I raised up from babies. I have their little baby pictures, like when they were this big, and I raised them up to be breeders, and the male started calling like 6 or 7 months in. Yeah. Although it was funny because I think he just hadn't grown into like his body yet, because the call would be like, it sounds like he was like beatboxing, like his throat would inflate, but only like every other would make an actual sound. It was pretty funny. I have a video of that.
He's learning how to talk.
He was figuring it out, but they're doing great now and breeding really successfully.
That's awesome. Whenever we talk about poison dart frogs, like I always got to ask the question, how dangerous are these guys? Like, am I going to die if it gets out and it touches you?
Yeah, if it even looks at you, you literally have like 10 minutes to call your friends and family. It's over, Like, this is a dangerous job, I get hazard pay from being here.
That's right.
But no, poison dart frogs get their toxicity from their diet and their environment, so these captive red frogs are completely harmless. People sometimes ask me, like, do you ever get tired of answering, like when I do my own videos and streams and stuff? Honestly, not really. I feel like if somebody's asking me or at a show, like, are
Yeah.
these poisonous? That's a person who's like not familiar with darts at all. Like, that's a brand new person I'm reaching, which is kind of cool, honestly.
That is cool. That is really cool.
But no, and I read on, I don't know if this might not be real, but I read on Wikipedia that Pumilio are the most toxic obligate. But they did not have a citation, so I'm dubious. But
Interesting.
But yeah, they're not nearly as toxic as something like, you know, your phyllobates. Obviously, your most toxic, but they're relatively toxic, but obviously only in the wild. So if you go to Costa Rica and you see one, don't pick it up and lick it. It's a bad idea. Don't recommend. But if you were to take that same frog and put it into captivity, it would actually lose its toxins in a few months, not having access to the alkaloid-rich diet and environment.
Yep. Cool. Now, last but not least, talk a little bit about who should be keeping Pumilio. Do you recommend that people start off with those as dart frogs? Give us some idea of like how hard you think they are to take care of, and who you would recommend to take on that type of species.
I think as far as care, maybe like intermediate. I don't feel like for me, I do a lot different with thumbnails with the large darts I've kept. Like I'm still feeding them 3 times a week, keeping their humidity up.
Yeah.
So I feel like if you were just keeping one, I think a lot of people could be successful. I would still say maybe like your second or third dart, perhaps.
Yep.
I'd say breeding is going to be like the main challenge, which is kind of funny because they're doing all the work. So it's like, shouldn't this be really easy? And sometimes it is really easy. Sometimes you just get like absolute unit parents that are just pumping out awesome babies, but sometimes you're not. You kind of have to like diagnose what the issue is and figure it out, whether it's diet or maybe they're laying too many eggs. But I would say, as far as like if you want to be really successful breeding, it might be a little bit more challenging, but I don't think the care is like too crazy. I wouldn't they're a little bit more expensive in a lot of cases than some other darts. So like if you haven't kept any darts, it might just make more sense to start out with something else, just so, you know, if there's something wrong, you don't spend a bunch of money on a crazy setup and some really expensive frogs, because Pumilio for obligates are relatively inexpensive as far as obligates. Like I think most of them are around like 100 to 200 ish. But in obligates in general, I mean, you can go, sky's the limit. Like Lamana are like, I've seen them like 1 to 2,000 per froglet. So it might be better to get a little bit more experience before you start shelling out a bunch of money. But yeah, I would say they're not like too bad.
Cool. One of the issues that I think I see people having issues with Pumilio is that they don't have your scenario where it's your job to take care of that tank. And so you get busy and you stop flushing out some of the bromeliads and they get kind of nasty and that kind of stuff. And so I guess one of my considerations, I'd say like, hey, if you're breeding them, either you have a really set schedule so that you're flushing those out, or you have automatic misting.
I think the automatic mister is a really good thing. I think that really helps a lot.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier and a lot more consistent, and you need that type of consistency with those guys.
Definitely.
Yeah. You don't want to take a week's vacation, not clean out those bromeliads. They get kind of nasty right away. So, cool. Thanks for educating us on Pumilio. I'm going to do a lightning round with you.
For sure.
If you don't know the answer to any question, you can say pass, but just give us the first thing that comes to your mind, all right? So you've done these ones before, so you may have similar answers or maybe a different. So, all right. If money and space were no issue, what's your next pet that you would have?
I was reading a book recently. It was like a young adult book. It had nothing to do with reptiles, but one of the characters, like dad is like a billionaire. I can speak English. And in their basement, they had a tuatara. Now I was like, this is kind of, they're like, no, they're billionaires. It's feasible.
Yep.
I looked it up. There's only 4 zoos in the country, in the United States, that have tuatara. There's probably fewer than like 100. Only like 2 of those zoos breed. I think it's like San Diego, Toledo, St. Louis, and Dallas.
Wow.
So I think that might have not been that realistic in the book, but if I could have one, that would be sweet. Because I mean, I could do a whole episode on tuatara. They're insane. They're basically like a lizard that's not a lizard that's been relatively unchanged for like 250 million years. Like I'm doing what they did in that book. I'm getting one in my basement, dude.
That's awesome. All right. Besides Josh's Frogs, who's a brand that's producing cool products, or a breeder that's really producing cool animals? Who's doing something really cool in our hobby?
I mentioned it earlier, but I really like those tadpoles. That's something I started putting in. I have in some of my thumbnail enclosures as well, but I really like it for the obligates.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to clean out.
Yep.
It's a lot easier to actually see the tadpole like developing, like, oh, he's like got arms, he's got legs now, where with it's the Brahm, you're fleshing it out, but you're really not going to be able to see, especially when they start laying them in like the lower, not branches, leaves, you know what I mean? Like, so
Yep.
I really like those tadpoles. I think that's a product that a lot of people could use.
I'm going to go totally old man on you, but like when I started in the hobby, it was just all film cans. And then Exoterra had a fake bromeliad that had a removable cup in the center of it. And this has long been discontinued. But I was always like, why did no one ever innovate on like the film can? And Exoterra tried at one point and then got rid of it. And the tadpole things, like those are amazing. Those needed to be in our hobby like 15, 20 years ago. So.
For real. I mean, if you guys don't know what it is, it's basically like a film canister with a little bit more volume, but it's also got like a lip like a bromeliad, so they can lay the eggs right there. And then sometimes the tads will just slide in the water, but the water's right there. And yeah, you can keep it clean. It's a good product.
It's got both utility and it looks decent.
It does
like
look nice. They come in colors.
Horrible.
You can try the different colors. It's a good product.
I always think of film cans like it's probably a more realistic view of the rainforest right on the edge where there's actual trash in there and the frogs are using the trash.
Yeah.
Like film cans just look like trash. So yeah. All right. Back to the lightning round. Your favorite animal or plant in the whole entire world? What's your favorite animal or plant? What's the coolest thing on our planet?
Yeah, so I've been continuing my trying to find every reptile and amphibian in Michigan. So I think for these, I'm just gonna highlight like a really cool one that we have here. And one of the more recent finds that was really awesome was the Massasauga rattlesnake. It's our only. I don't want to get into like comments of like, oh, like do we count the hognose or the garter snake as venomous because they've got the Duvernoy's gland, but it's like our only true like fanged venomous snake. It's our only rattlesnake. It's really, really cool. It's pretty small. It's pretty shy. It's not something you're gonna like really accidentally like stumble across, but it's just a really cool species.
That's cool.
In fact, where I was looking for them, they had signs everywhere like, this is Massasauga habitat, keep your eyes peeled. And when I was there the first time just asking people like, hey, have you ever seen these? They were like, what's a Massasauga? What do you mean? I'm like, oh, it's a rattlesnake. They're like, I'm getting out of here. I'm walking faster. Like, this person's probably walked here every day for 5 years and never seen one. Like, they're hard to find, but they're a really cool species.
What did you want to be when you were a kid?
Ever since I was 9, I wanted to work with reptiles or amphibians. I think at first I wanted to be like a vet, maybe like a zookeeper, a zoo curator, but I ended up stumbling upwards into what I'm doing now, and I think it worked out.
That's cool. That's cool. All right, you got an hour of free time. No one's bothering you. What are you doing with that hour of free time?
Either continuing my search of all the Michigan reptiles or amphibians. I think I'm up to like 35 of like 56-ish. Or I like to like stream and make videos and stuff. Gonna sell out real quick, but probably one of those two things.
Cool. All right. Last thing, if you could give us either a piece of advice or words of wisdom, remind us of something, what's the one thing you would tell us? You got everybody listening to you, either about keeping animals or about life in general. What's the one piece of advice you give us?
If you're going out herping, definitely like be prepared with like the clothes and stuff that you choose, because like I don't know if you noticed, but like I've got like poisonous plants like and bites and stuff everywhere, like because I'm just I just wing it sometimes. But yeah, being prepared when you go out on like a hike or a herping excursion. Just dress for like, that's just good advice in general. Dress for like the occasion,
Yep. Cool. Awesome. You probably have seen Jake doing videos across the internet. Check those out. He's done some videos for us and some lives and that kind of stuff. Just a wealth of knowledge and a lot of experience taking care of these animals. So thanks a lot for joining us and sharing some wisdom on Pumilio for us.
Yeah, no worries.
And thank you for listening to the Josh's Frogs podcast. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoy this content and want to stay up to date, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow us across social media. We always want to bring you the best content, so let us know what you think in the comments. And for all your reptile and amphibian needs, be sure to check us out at joshsfrogs.com. We have an amazing selection. Until next time, stay curious, stay froggy, and keep exploring.